and the reason being, in that air-chilled environment for the period of time that we hung this carcass, there's a lot of research out there that supports the fact that we do not have E. coli or Salmonella present at the other end of the process. So in other words, when these animals come off the harvest floor, if we had a pathogen like E. coli or Salmonella present on the carcass, which we have zero tolerance for any fecal matter or contamination to enter our cooler, but if it's an unseen particle, you couldn't see it. When it goes into that air-chilled environment, it simply can't survive for that period of time at those temperatures. And that's supported by the fact that we have never had a positive E. coli or Salmonella with all of our sampling done here. So yeah, basically three things happen. You get a more tender beef, a more flavorful beef, and a safer beef. But while that process is happening, we talk about the intensifying the flavor, moisture is evaporating out of the carcass. So we wind up with a lighter carcass. That's one of the reasons why industry no longer does this, and in speed too. So these particular carcasses were actually butchered almost 3 weeks ago. We're at day 19, and we did hang them a little bit extra long just because we wanted to, for the sake of this video, we wanted to both side by side, and we just had that opportunity. So they hung for a few extra days, which is fantastic. Basically day 0 to day 7 is the most dramatic change. We'll never touch a carcass before day 7. 7 through 14, you have a much more gradual curve, and then it continues through 14 through 21 days. We rarely ever hang past 21 days. The carcasses each lost about 17 pounds while they were in our cooler. That moisture evaporated out of them. We do what's called a hot carcass weight, so as soon as they're slaughtered, they're weighed. That's how we pay our farmers. It's actually a legal standard that you weigh them just after they're harvested, and then they go in the cooler, and so 17 pounds lost from each carcass. This one began at 407 hot carcass weight, now weighs 390. That's about 5% or so of the carcass evaporated. This one weighs 266, and it now weighs 249. So again, 17 pounds, or about 6.5% of this carcass just poof. So that also drives the price up a little bit. We talk about premium prices. We pay our farms. Now, it should be noted, Wayne County's own cattle here. We had one from the grain-fed farm, which is in Wayne County, about 15 miles away. This comes from Green Vista Farm, Worcester, Ohio, about 12 miles away. We're going to talk a little bit more about the different farming practices. Just looking at the carcasses, you can obviously see a big size difference. Obviously, different things go into it, breed of cattle, and then we're talking about the feed source, so grain-fed versus grass-fed. And then you can maybe see just a little bit different color of the carcass. This one's going to have a little bit more yellow fat, obviously a leaner carcass. So we're going to get a little bit more of those details as we run them through the processing floor. We're going to talk about why we do both varieties of cattle, what makes them different, and it's really just about what works for us. And the customer being our boss, they've kind of, this is kind of something that they wanted, so we produce it here at White Feather Meats. So let's get them into the processing floor and talk a little bit more about the differences.
Never miss a Monday. It's time to move these onto those hooks.
Now that we're back in the cooler, I'll talk a little bit about the coolers and the dry aging process. So this cooler, it uses low flow evaporators. Those are something that keep the air moving around in here, and we hold it at 35 degrees, which is the optimal dry aging temperature. As you noted, the grass-fed carcass by weight lost 17 pounds compared to the grain-fed, which also lost 17 pounds. You may wonder why the grass-fed, as a percentage of its beginning weight, lost more. It's because it has less fat cover. That fat is actually going to hold more of the moisture in. So with the leaner animals, you typically get a higher percentage. Bison, for example, we actually don't hang them quite as long because they just they'll dry out too much because they don't have that protective fat layer around the carcass. You notice also Seth leaves me with the bigger carcass. He needs to do a little more working out than I do.
let's get them cut up. We'll get them pushed out onto the floor, and let's do some comparisons.
The customer is our boss. Essentially, we here at White Feather Meats make sure that for our retail store, we give the customer the value and what they ask for. So about 10 years ago, customers were asking about grain-fed beef. So we, at the time, were a custom meat processor, so we were processing beef for Green Vista Farm in Worcester, Ohio, and that was about the time that they started up their grass-fed beef operation about 10, 12 years ago. So we began harvesting the grain-fed beef from their farm so that our customers had essentially a healthier option, because when you're talking about grain-fed versus grass-fed, now ethically these animals are raised very similar in the sense that they're both raised beginning on pasture. I mean, all cows drink milk as babies, so basically they start out the same way as baby calves, born on the farm, out in the green pasture. And then what happens is on Green Vista's farm, they are essentially an organic farm. We're talking no spray, no pesticide, no herbicide use, locust fence posts, so they're non-treated, all this stuff, so that what we have is an animal that's only ever ate grass in its entire existence. Now the customer was seeking that out because, number one, they wanted an animal that was guaranteed to be free of any pesticides, herbicides, any chemicals. Number two, there's a belief system out there that animals like cows, ruminating animals, are only supposed to eat grass. So we like to say it's kind of like olive oil versus butter. When you have the 100% grass-fed beef, you're going to have more of that olive oil version. You're going to have a little bit better balance of your omega-3 and 9 fats to your omega-6 fats. Basically just a healthier option. There's argument for the environment as well. The animals that are raised out on pasture, if you think about it, you don't have manure on the feedlot. It's just going right back into the grasses. And it's very important too to mention that the grasses that you use cannot just be any old thing that grows up in the backyard or the back 40. Jonathan Berger, Green Vista Farm, has a background in soil and water conservation, so he had a good basis knowledge for starting his grass-fed operation. What happened was he did all the research to plant the right grasses on his farm. And then, to answer the question, you may see it in the grocery store, why is grass-fed beef more expensive than grain-fed beef? Should be easy enough to feed a beef grass, right? You just, grass is free. Well, that's not entirely true. One, to go back to that statement that you have to plant the grasses and manage the grasses so that you get the right grass. Things like fescue can off-flavor the beef, and you'll get a beef that doesn't have, it's not palatable. It just doesn't taste very good. Think in the sense where if you eat an organic granola bar, for example, and it just tastes disgusting, it's still a granola bar. You could have the same thing with beef if they're not raised with the right management. So grass-fed beef take longer to finish than grain-fed beef. It's actually cheaper and more efficient to feed an animal or finish an animal out on grain than it is grass.
Here are the primals that we talked about. We have a tenderloin, we have a strip loin, we have the ribeye section, we also have a sirloin. So these are going to be what we do our comparisons with. We'll do the same thing on the grain-fed half as we did with this grass-fed half. And then once we have everything out here on the floor, we'll cut each individual primal section into steaks so you can see a side-by-side. Also, while I have you here, a lot of people ask about the picanha steak. They want to know where it comes from and what it is. So this is the sirloin primal right here, this whole piece. Located right on the top of this primal is this portion right here. This is the picanha. So there's a seam right here, and if I pull this apart, you basically do it with your fingers if you wanted to. I would remove the picanha, which is technically the sirloin cap, from the remaining portion of the sirloin. So just wanted to let you guys know, the ones that have been asking, picanha, This is where it comes from. Now you know.